The air in the Metropolitan General Hospital archives is a dead thing. It carries the dry, dusty scent of a million forgotten stories pressed into manila folders, and the sharp, sterile tang of antiseptic that seeps through the vents from the floors above. It is a place of endings, of records filed and lives closed. For Alara Vance, it is a sanctuary, a tomb. She moves between the towering metal shelves like a ghost, her oversized gray cardigan a form of camouflage against the rows of gray steel. Her mousy brown hair is always pulled back, but a single lock perpetually falls across her forehead, a nervous habit to brush it away, to ensure it covers the tiny, silvery scar near her temple. Her glasses, thick and functional, are always sliding down her nose. She is a creature of quiet corners and whispered apologies. The other staff members see her as slow, inefficient, a piece of hospital furniture that occasionally fumbles a stack of papers. They call her Mouse when they think she cannot hear. She hears. She always hears. But she never reacts. Reaction is a luxury she gave up long ago. A quiet life was the price of survival, and she was determined to pay it in full. Dr. Alistair Finch is the king of Metropolitan General. As chief of surgery, he strides through the halls with the unshakable confidence of a man who has never been told no. His suits are tailored, his silver hair is perfect, and his voice is a weapon he wields with surgical precision. He is brilliant, a master of the operating theater, but his brilliance is eclipsed by a towering, monstrous ego. He views the hospital not as a place of healing, but as his personal fiefdom, populated by subjects of varying degrees of incompetence. He despises weakness. He despises inefficiency. Therefore, he despises Alara Vance. The morning began with a low hum of anxiety. Dr. Finch was preparing for a high-profile, televised surgery on a city councilman. It was more a media event than a medical procedure, and his mood was fouler than usual. A file was missing. The preoperative checklist for a surgery performed a decade ago. A trivial piece of paper he needed for a historical footnote in his presentation. His voice boomed over the intercom, cracking with impatience. Records. I need the Anderson file. From 2012. Now. Not in an hour. Not when your clerk finally wakes up. Now. Alara flinched. The Anderson file. She knew it was misfiled under Anderson, a common mistake. She scurried to the correct shelf, her fingers, usually so clumsy in this world of paper and staples, moving with a strange, forgotten grace. She found it instantly. But she was not fast enough. Not for him. Just as she pulled the thin folder from its slot, the doors to the archive burst open. Dr. Finch stood there, his face a mask of thunderous rage. Behind him, Dr. Willis, a sycophantic resident, and Anna, a young nurse with kind eyes, hovered nervously. Is it possible to be this useless? Finch's voice echoed in the silent room. He did not wait for an answer. He strode toward her, his expensive shoes clicking menacingly on the linoleum. I needed that file 5 minutes ago, he snarled, snatching it from her hand. His movement was so aggressive that he knocked a precarious stack of folders from the cart beside her. An avalanche of paper cascaded to the floor. Look at this mess, he spat, gesturing at the scattered documents around her feet. This is a perfect metaphor for your entire existence in this hospital. Chaos, incompetence. Alara bent to pick them up, her cheeks burning with shame. I'm sorry, Dr. Finch. I'll clean it up right away. Don't bother, he said, his voice dripping with contempt. You'll probably just file them under the wrong decade. He looked at Dr. Willis, who snickered appropriately. Anna looked at the floor, her expression pained. Finch took a step closer, towering over her as she knelt. He leaned down, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial, venomous whisper. I don't know what sad story got you this job, but I am running a world-class institution. I have no room for pathetic, trembling mice. Do you understand me? Alara could only nod, her eyes fixed on a loose thread on the cuff of his trousers. The humiliation was a physical weight, pressing the air from her lungs. She felt the familiar, cold dread creeping up her spine, the feeling she had spent years trying to bury. He straightened up, turning to leave. Clean up your mess, he commanded to the air, as if she were no longer worth addressing directly. He swept out of the room, his sycophant trailing in his wake. Anna lingered for a moment. "Alara, are you okay?" she whispered. Alara looked up, forcing a small, watery smile. "I'm fine, just clumsy." She was not fine. She was a fraud. Every day, she played the part of the meek, broken woman. Most days, it was easy. But moments like this, the raw, public degradation, scraped away the fragile persona, and she could feel the things she kept locked away begin to stir. A creature of fire and ice, of discipline and violence, a woman who did not tremble before bullies. But that woman was dead. She had to be. Alara took a deep breath, the scent of dust and decay filling her lungs, and began to pick up the scattered papers, one by one. The sanctuary was closing in. The tomb was getting smaller. The first siren was a faint cry in the distance. Alara, still on her hands and knees in the archive, barely registered it. In a city this size, sirens were just background noise, the constant soundtrack of urban life. But then another joined it, and another, until the air itself seemed to vibrate with a rising chorus of panic. Upstairs, the world had exploded. A multi-car pileup on the interstate during morning rush hour. A tanker truck had jackknifed, crushing a dozen vehicles. The emergency room at Metropolitan General, the closest Level 1 trauma center, was bracing for impact. The relative quiet of the archives was shattered. The overhead speakers crackled to life, a frantic voice announcing a code triage, a mass casualty event. All non-essential personnel were to stay clear of the ER and surgical floors. Alara felt a jolt, a phantom limb twitching. Her body wanted to run toward the chaos, not away from it. It was an instinct she had to fight, a ghost of a past life. She forced herself to stay put, to continue her meaningless task of sorting files. She was a records clerk. That was all. The first wave of patients hit the ER like a tidal wave. Screams, the smell of blood and gasoline, the frantic beeping of monitors. It was a symphony of controlled chaos, and its conductor was Dr. Alistair Finch. This was his element. In the heart of the storm, his arrogance became a twisted kind of asset. He was decisive, barking orders, his hands moving with practiced, beautiful efficiency as he assessed the broken bodies rolling in. He triaged patients with the cold detachment of a god sorting souls. Among the victims was a John Doe. He was pulled from the wreckage of a rusted, beat-up sedan, far from the epicenter of the crash. He had no wallet, no phone, no identifying marks save for a series of faded, intricate tattoos that coiled around one arm. He was unconscious, his face battered and bruised, his clothes little more than rags. Finch gave him 30 seconds. He ran a practiced eye over the man. Multiple fractures, a likely concussion, lacerations. He was badly injured, but his vitals were stable for now. Finch saw a transient, a piece of human debris caught in a rich man's accident. At the same time, a gurney carrying the city councilman from the televised surgery, who had unfortunately been caught in the pileup, was wheeled in. He was conscious, moaning about his broken arm and the damage to his new car. Finch immediately pivoted. "Get him to Trauma 1! Page ortho, neuro, and plastics. Full workup, now!" he commanded. He then gestured dismissively at the unconscious John Doe. "This one. Stabilize him and move him to a holding ward. I need this bay for actual priorities. He can wait." "Doctor," a resident began, "his pressure is a little erratic." "It's a concussion," Finch snapped, not even looking back. "Bag him, tag him, and move him. We don't have time for vagrants." The order was given. The John Doe was pushed to the side, a life deemed less valuable, a problem to be dealt with later. In the chaos of the ER, no one thought to question the great Dr. Finch. His word was law, and his law was about to become a death sentence. The ER was running out of everything: saline bags, sutures, sterile gauze. A harried floor manager, desperate, called the one department no one ever called in a crisis: records. "Alara, it's Mark. I know this is a crazy request, but we're completely out of intake forms, and everything else. Can you check the deep storage closets down there? Maybe bring up a cart of whatever you can find? Anything helps." Alara's heart hammered against her ribs. Go up there? Into the noise, the smell, the storm? It was the last place on earth she wanted to be. But it was a direct request, a cry for help in its own way. She couldn't refuse. She loaded a rolling cart with boxes of gloves, stacks of forms, and rolls of medical tape she knew were kept in an old supply room adjacent to the archive. Her hands shook as she pushed the cart into the service elevator. The scent of antiseptic grew stronger, laced with the metallic tang of blood. It was a smell she knew better than her own name. The elevator doors opened onto bedlam. The hallway was lined with gurneys, the overflow from the packed emergency bays. Staff rushed past, their faces grim masks of concentration. Alara felt small, invisible, a gray rock in the middle of a raging river. She pushed her cart forward, her head down, trying to deliver her supplies and retreat back to her quiet basement. And then she saw him. He was on a gurney, parked in an alcove, waiting to be moved. The John Doe. A nurse was hastily checking his IV drip before rushing off to the next patient. From a distance, he looked just as Dr. Finch had described, a broken man, another casualty. But as Alara passed, something made her stop. It was not a conscious decision. It was a signal, a faint blip on a radar she thought had been decommissioned forever, a flicker of movement. She took a half step closer, pretending to adjust the boxes on her cart. She looked at the man's face. It was the tremor, a tiny, almost imperceptible flutter of his left eyelid. It wasn't a random nerve firing. It was a specific, rhythmic, myoclonic jerk. Her gaze sharpened, the mousy clerk persona dissolving like smoke. Her eyes scanned his body with an entirely new kind of perception. The discoloration of his nail beds, not the deep blue of hypoxia, but a faint, cherry red tint. The sweat on his brow, despite the cool air of the hospital, had a strange, oily sheen. She leaned closer, ostensibly to check the name on his wristband, which only read John Doe. She inhaled, and there it was. Faint, almost lost beneath the smells of blood and antiseptic, but unmistakable to a nose trained for it. The smell of bitter almonds. Cyanide. Or, more accurately, a derivative. A fast-acting, organophosphate-based neurotoxin designed to mimic the symptoms of blunt force trauma. Designed to be missed. The erratic blood pressure the resident had noticed wasn't from a concussion. It was the first stage of systemic collapse. The standard sedative Dr. Finch would inevitably order to calm a combative head trauma patient would react with the agent, shutting down his respiratory system in seconds. He had maybe 20 minutes left. The world snapped into focus. The chaos of the ER faded into a low hum. There was only the patient, the mission. Her training, buried under years of dust and regret, roared to life. This was not a hospital. It was a hot zone. This was not a patient. He was a friendly casualty. And she was the only medic on site. Her timidity vanished. Her first thought was protocol, chain of command. She had to warn someone. She saw Anna, the kind nurse, rushing past. "Anna," she said. Her voice was still quiet, but it had a new edge. Anna paused, surprised to see her there. "Alara, you should be downstairs." "The John Doe," Alara said, pointing with her chin. "The one in the alcove. Don't let anyone give him a sedative. And find me his chart." Anna blinked, confused. "What? Why?" Dr. Finch said, "It's not a concussion. It's a toxin," Alara interrupted, her voice gaining strength. "I need his chart. Now." The urgency in Alara's tone was so alien, so out of character, that Anna simply nodded and hurried to the nurse's station. She returned a moment later, holding a clipboard. "There's not much here. Vitals, Dr. Finch's initial assessment." Alara snatched the chart. Her eyes devoured the numbers. Blood pressure fluctuating wildly. Heart rate tachycardic. Respiratory rate shallow. It confirmed her fears. She had to get to Finch. She found him in Trauma 1, basking in the glow of the monitors and the gratitude of the councilman's family. He was holding court, explaining the simple procedure he would perform. "Dr. Finch," Alara said, stepping into the bay. Her voice was low but clear. It cut through the air. He turned, his expression shifting from magnanimous to furious in a heartbeat. "What are you doing here? I thought I told you to stay out of my ER." "The John Doe," she said, holding up the chart. "Your assessment is wrong. It's not head trauma. It's a neurotoxin. He's showing signs of acetylcholinesterase inhibition." The technical jargon, coming from the mouth of the mousy records clerk, was so unexpected that it stunned Finch into a brief silence. Dr. Willis snorted. "Acetyl what?" Willis mocked. "Did you read that on the internet, Mouse?" Finch recovered. his face flushing a dangerous shade of red. "Are you insane?" he hissed. "You are a filing clerk. You are less than a candy striper. You have no right to question my diagnosis, let alone speak to me." "The smell of bitter almonds on his breath," Alara pressed, her voice steady. "The fasciculations. The cherry-red cyanosis in his nail beds. The symptoms are classic." "There is nothing wrong with him that a few hours in observation won't cure," Finch said, his voice rising. "I am the chief of surgery here, and you are nothing." He turned to a passing nurse. "Nurse, the John Doe in the hall. He's probably getting agitated. Give him 10 milligrams of diazepam." Alara's blood ran cold. Diazepam. A benzodiazepine. It would potentiate the effects of the nerve agent. It would stop his heart. "No!" The word was a shout. It was sharp, powerful, and utterly unlike her. The entire trauma bay fell silent. Everyone stared. Finch looked as if she had physically struck him. "What did you just say to me?" "You do that, and you will kill him," Alara said, her eyes locked on his. The timid clerk was gone. In her place stood someone else. Someone hard. Someone dangerous. "Get out," Finch whispered, his voice trembling with rage. "Get out of my ER before I have you arrested." He turned to the nurse again. "Do as I said. Now." The nurse, wide-eyed, nodded and hurried away with a syringe on a small tray. For a heartbeat, Alara was frozen. She had two choices. Obey, retreat to her basement, and let the man die. Or she could burn her quiet life to the ground. There was no choice at all. The switch flipped. The world slowed down. Alara moved. She did not run. She moved with a liquid, predatory grace that was utterly terrifying. She intercepted the nurse just as she reached the John Doe's gurney. "I'll take that," Alara said, her voice calm and absolute. She took the syringe from the stunned nurse's hand. "But Dr. Finch said, there's a code blue in Bay 3, Alara lied, her eyes boring into the nurse's. "Go." The command was so authoritative, the nurse didn't question it. She turned and ran. Alara palmed the syringe, her mind a whirlwind of calculations. She needed an antidote. The standard hospital crash carts would have it, if you knew what to look for. She scanned the chaotic hallway and spotted one near an empty room. She grabbed it, her movements precise and economical. No fumbling, no hesitation. She yanked open the drawers, her hands flying past the common resuscitation drugs, epinephrine, amiodarone, and going straight for the ones in the back. The toxicology kit. She pulled out 2 vials. Pralidoxime, atropine, the 2 PAM chloride combo, the standard military-issue antidote for nerve agents. She drew the correct dosages into a new syringe with a speed born of muscle memory, a memory forged in the back of violently shaking helicopters with blood on the floor. She returned to the John Doe's side. His breathing was shallow now, his skin clammy. He was fading fast. "Hold on," she whispered, as much to herself as to him. She expertly found the port on his IV line and injected the life-saving cocktail directly into his bloodstream. Now she had to hide him. Finch would be coming. Security would be coming. She looked around. A supply closet. Perfect. With a strength no one would have believed she possessed, she unlocked the wheels of the gurney and maneuvered it silently into the small, dark room, closing the door just enough to make it look unused. Inside, in the darkness, surrounded by boxes of saline and bedpans, she finally took a breath. She placed 2 fingers on the man's neck, feeling for his carotid artery. His pulse was still thready, but it was stronger. The rhythm was evening out. The antidote was working. She had bought him time. The closet door flew open, banging against the wall. Light flooded the small space, silhouetting the furious form of Dr. Alistair Finch. Behind him were 2 burly security guards. His face was a grotesque mask of apoplectic rage. He had seen it all on the security cameras. The lie to the nurse, the theft of the drugs, the abduction of a patient. "What have you done?" he shrieked, his voice cracking. Alara stood up, positioning herself between Finch and the gurney. Her expression was calm, her body language defiant. The mouse was gone for good. "I saved his life," she said simply. "You assaulted a nurse. You stole medication. You have endangered a patient with your psychotic delusions," he screamed, spittle flying from his lips. He pointed a trembling finger at her. "You are fired. Do you hear me? Fired! He turned to the guards. Get her out of here. Now. I want her escorted off the premises and a formal police report filed. Gross insubordination, theft, assault. The guards moved in. Alara did not resist. There was no point. The man on the gurney was stabilizing. That was the only victory that mattered. She gave the patient one last look, her clinical gaze assessing his vital signs by sight alone. He would live. They grabbed her arms roughly. She didn't flinch. They dragged her from the closet, through the ER, where staff now stared openly, their faces a mixture of shock and morbid curiosity. Anna watched, her hand over her mouth, tears in her eyes. They didn't let her go back to the archives to get her coat or her bag. One of the guards was sent to fetch her purse, which he then tossed out the emergency exit doors after her. Alara stumbled onto the rain-slicked pavement of the ambulance bay. The doors slammed shut behind her, the sound echoing with finality. The pouring rain plastered her thin cardigan to her skin in seconds. Her glasses were spotted with water. She stood there for a moment, shivering, the sounds of the hospital sirens now muted, distant. It was over. Her quiet life, the carefully constructed fortress against her past, had been breached and set ablaze. She had lost her job, her sanctuary, and was likely facing criminal charges, and she had never felt more alive. The rain was cold, relentless. It soaked through her clothes, chilling her to the bone, but Alara barely noticed. She was walking, though she had no destination in mind. Each step was heavy, the reality of her situation sinking in. Fired, disgraced, a potential criminal record, all for a man whose name she didn't even know. She pulled her useless, sodden cardigan tighter around herself. The city lights blurred through the rain on her glasses. It was back to square one. New city, new name, new life to build from the ashes. She had done it before. She could do it again. The thought brought no comfort, only a profound, soul-deep exhaustion. Then came a new sound, cutting through the steady drumming of the rain. A deep, rhythmic chopping. It grew louder, closer, a thunderous whoomp, whoomp, whoomp that vibrated in her chest. It was a sound from her nightmares, a sound from her past. Helicopters. She looked up, squinting through the downpour. 2 of them. They weren't police choppers or news crews. They were sleek, black, and utterly devoid of markings. MH-60 Blackhawks. The kind you weren't supposed to see over a major city. They weren't heading for the hospital's rooftop helipad. They were descending on the ambulance bay she had just been thrown out of. Back inside the hospital, chaos erupted into sheer pandemonium. The twin helicopters landed with an earth-shaking roar, their powerful rotor wash shattering the glass of the ER entrance and sending equipment skittering across the floor. People screamed and dove for cover, thinking it was a terrorist attack. Before the skids had even fully settled, black ropes snaked down from the open doors. A dozen men in full tactical gear, armed with short-barreled rifles, rappelled to the ground with terrifying efficiency. They formed a perimeter, their movements fluid and coordinated. They were not police. They were not SWAT. They were something else entirely. Dr. Finch, who had been gloating about the firing to a group of residents, stormed out to confront them. "What is the meaning of this? This is a hospital. You have no authority here." The team's leader, a master sergeant with a face like carved granite and cold, intelligent eyes, ignored him completely. He strode into the ER, his boots crunching on the broken glass. His team followed, securing the area. "We're looking for someone," the master sergeant announced, his voice a low growl that commanded instant attention. "We're looking for the medic, the one they call Angel." The hospital staff stared at him, bewildered. "Medic? Angel? There's no one here by that name," Finch said, stepping forward, trying to reassert his authority. "I am in charge here. Identify yourselves immediately." The master sergeant finally turned to look at Finch, his gaze dismissive, as if looking at an insect. "We're looking for a woman. Brown hair, glasses, small scar on her temple. She was here minutes ago. She treated a John Doe from the interstate pileup. Where is she?" A wave of confusion and dawning realization rippled through the staff. Brown hair, glasses, a scar. They were describing Alara, the clumsy records clerk. Anna stepped forward, her voice trembling. "You mean Alara? Dr. Finch just fired her. He had security throw her out. The Master Sergeant's eyes narrowed, a dangerous glint appearing in them. He turned his cold gaze back to Finch, who suddenly looked much smaller. You fired her? Before Finch could answer, the Master Sergeant's radio crackled. Alpha 1, this is Eagle. We have a visual on the asset's guardian, 3 blocks east of your position, on foot, moving to intercept. Copy that, Eagle, the Master Sergeant grunted. He gave Finch one last look of pure contempt. You better pray we're not too late. The rain was turning into a deluge. Alara huddled in the doorway of a closed shop, trying to escape the worst of it. A black SUV, the same kind favored by federal agencies, screeched to a halt at the curb in front of her, its tires sending up a spray of dirty water. She tensed, expecting trouble. The back door opened. The Master Sergeant from the helicopter got out. He was huge, a mountain of muscle and tactical gear, and he moved with a quiet confidence that was more intimidating than any overt threat. Alara Vance? He asked. His voice was rough, but not unkind. She flinched, pulling back into the shadows of the doorway. Who's asking? My name is Master Sergeant Rex. Admiral Thorne sent us, he said. The name hit her like a physical blow. Admiral Thorne. Her former commanding officer. The man who was like a father to her. The Admiral, she whispered, her mind reeling. We have a situation, Rex continued, his tone urgent. Captain Jackson is compromised. Your patient, the John Doe. Captain Cole Spectre Jackson, one of the most decorated operators in JSOC, a man who was officially a ghost. Alara had served with him on 3 separate deployments. Rex's eyes softened for a fraction of a second. The Admiral said to tell you, Angel, we need you. Angel, her call sign. The name she had earned in the blood and dust of a dozen forgotten battlefields. The name of the woman she had tried to kill and bury. Tears welled in Alara's eyes, mingling with the rain on her face. The past wasn't just knocking on the door, it had kicked it down. Get in, Rex said gently. She did not hesitate. She climbed into the warm, dry interior of the SUV. The door closed, shutting out the storm. The ride back to the hospital was a blur. The SUV sped through the streets, ignoring traffic laws. Rex spoke into his radio, his language a clipped professional shorthand that she understood perfectly. Eagle has the package, returning to baseplate, ETA 2 minutes. When they arrived, the scene was one of military occupation. The SF team had established a hard perimeter, no one in or out. Rex led Alara from the SUV. Her wet, pathetic clothes and disheveled appearance were a stark contrast to the disciplined soldiers surrounding her. She walked back through the shattered glass doors of the ER, this time flanked by a guard of elite warriors. Every eye in the room was on her. The nurses, the doctors, the residents who had mocked her. They all stared in stunned, silent disbelief. Dr. Finch stood in the middle of the room, his face pale, arguing with another soldier. He saw her, and his jaw dropped. You! What are you doing back here? I had you thrown out! Before Alara could respond, a new figure emerged from the crowd. He was a man in his late 60s, dressed in a crisp Navy service dress uniform, his shoulders heavy with the 4 stars of a full admiral. He radiated an aura of absolute, unshakable authority that made Dr. Finch's power seem like a child's tantrum. It was Admiral Marcus Thorne. He ignored Finch completely. His eyes, sharp and clear, found Alara. A look of immense relief washed over his face. Angel, he said, his voice thick with emotion. He walked to her, placing his hands on her shoulders. Thank God they found you. Is the captain secure? He's stable, sir, Alara reported, her voice automatically crispening into its old military cadence. I administered a 2-PAM chloride cocktail to counteract an organophosphate agent. He's in a supply closet on the east side of the ER. Finch, seeing his authority evaporating before his eyes, finally snapped. Admiral, with all due respect, I don't know who you are, but this woman is a disgraced records clerk I personally fired not 30 minutes ago for gross incompetence and endangering a patient. Admiral Thorne turned slowly, his friendly demeanor vanishing. His eyes became chips of Arctic ice. He looked Dr. Finch up and down, a silent, withering dismissal that was more insulting than any shout. This clerk, Thorne said, his voice dangerously quiet. is Senior Flight Nurse and Pararescue Specialist Alara Vance. She holds the Distinguished Flying Cross for valor under fire during Operation Nightfall, the Air Force Cross for extracting 3 wounded soldiers under direct enemy mortar fire, and a Bronze Star. She has more confirmed saves in contested territory than any medic in the last decade. He took a step toward Finch, who involuntarily took a step back. The patient you dismissed as a vagrant is Captain Cole Jackson of the United States Naval Special Warfare Development Group, a national hero. And the incompetence you fired her for was her correctly identifying an advanced chemical weapon that your catastrophic misdiagnosis would have made fatal. Thorne's voice rose to a controlled roar that silenced the entire hospital. You are relieved of your duties, Doctor. As of this moment, this entire wing is under my command, and Flight Nurse Vance is in charge of all medical decisions regarding Captain Jackson. Now get him out of my sight. 2 soldiers moved to flank Finch, their expressions unreadable. Finch stood, his mouth opening and closing like a fish, his face drained of all color. The king had been deposed, his kingdom had been taken, and the mouse he had tried to crush was now wearing the crown. In a hastily secured operating room, the truth was laid bare. Admiral Thorne, Alara, and Master Sergeant Rex stood over Captain Jackson, who was now hooked up to military-grade medical monitors brought in by the team. The car crash was no accident, Thorne explained, his voice grim. It was a wet work team. They wanted him dead. Jackson was deep undercover with a domestic terror cell, a splinter group called the Sons of Gideon. Alara checked Jackson's pupils. They were responsive. The antidote had worked perfectly. What were they into, sir? Weapons-grade chemistry, Thorne said. The toxin you identified is their signature. It's a new generation nerve agent, binary, fast-acting, and designed specifically to be mistaken for common trauma by first responders. Jackson was hours away from getting the location of their primary target. That information is still locked in his head. A knot of ice formed in Alara's stomach. This was bigger than just a failed assassination. So the enemy knows he's alive, and they know he's here. Exactly, Rex chimed in, his eyes scanning a tablet showing the hospital security feeds. And they won't give up. This hospital is a soft target. We need to move him. As he spoke, Rex's finger froze on the screen. He zoomed in on a particular feed, the parking garage, from 2 hours before the crash. It showed Dr. Finch, standing next to his luxury sedan, talking to a man in a hooded sweatshirt. The man passed Finch a thick envelope. Finch took it, glanced inside, and nodded. Sir, Rex said, his voice tight, you need to see this. Thorne and Alara looked at the screen. The man in the sweatshirt turned slightly, and the camera caught a glimpse of his face. It was a face from an intelligence briefing Alara had seen years ago, a known fixer for mercenary groups. Run a trace on Finch's financials. Now, Thorne ordered into his radio. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Finch hadn't just been arrogant. He hadn't just been incompetent. He was a traitor. He had been paid to make sure Captain Jackson died on his operating table. The misdiagnosis, the order for the fatal sedative, it was all deliberate. He was their inside man, Alara whispered, a cold fury building within her. The humiliation she'd felt earlier curdled into white-hot rage. Finch hadn't just tried to ruin her career. He had actively tried to commit murder for money. Suddenly, an alarm blared on the monitor beside Jackson's bed. A proximity alert. One of Rex's men had tagged the floor with discrete motion sensors. Breach on the stairwell, Rex yelled, drawing his sidearm. Unidentified individual, moving fast. The team outside the OR shouted commands, but it was too late. The door to the OR, which had been locked, was suddenly forced open. Not with a bang, but with the quiet, professional hiss of a hydraulic spreader. A man dressed as an orderly stood there, but he held no clipboard. He held a pistol, fitted with a suppressor. He raised the weapon, aiming it directly at the head of the unconscious Captain Jackson. There was no time to think, only to act. Alara was closest. As the assassin's finger tightened on the trigger, she grabbed the heaviest object within reach, a stainless steel surgical tray loaded with instruments. She threw her body in front of Jackson's bed, holding the tray up like a shield. The suppressed pistol made 3 soft coughs. Pff, pff, pff. 2 of the rounds slammed into the steel tray, which buckled but held, the impact jarring her arms to the shoulder. The The third bullet grazed her side, a searing hot line of pain. She ignored it. The assassin, shocked by her sudden intervention, hesitated for a split second. It was all she needed. With a guttural roar, she lunged forward, not away. She drove the edge of the bent tray into the assassin's throat. He gagged, stumbling backward, his weapon clattering to the floor. As he fought for air, Alara kicked out, sweeping his legs from under him. He went down hard. Before he could recover, Rex and another soldier were on him, disarming him and pinning him to the ground with brutal efficiency. Alara stood panting, adrenaline coursing through her veins. The pain in her side flared, and she looked down to see a dark stain spreading on her gray cardigan. "Angel, you're hit!" Thorne exclaimed, rushing to her side. "It's a graze. I'm fine, sir," she said, her voice strained. She looked at the subdued assassin, then at the compromised OR. "Rex was right. We have to get him out of here. Now." Thorne nodded, his face a grim mask. "This facility is burned. We can't go to a military base. Their intelligence network is too good. They'll be waiting." They were trapped. The city was a cage, and the hunters were closing in. Alara's mind, now fully switched to combat mode, raced through options. They needed a place that was off-book, off-grid, defensible. A place no one would ever think to look. An image surfaced from her childhood. A memory of pine trees and cold mountain air. "Sir, I have a place," she said, looking at Thorne. "My family owned a cabin, deep in the Allegheny National Forest. It's remote, no electricity, no running water. But it's solid, defensible, and no one has been there in 15 years. It doesn't exist on any modern map." Thorne looked at Rex, who gave a sharp nod. It was a long shot, but it was their only shot. "Make the call," Thorne commanded. "Prep the captain for immediate transport. We're going dark." The escape from the hospital was a masterclass in controlled chaos. While one part of the SF team created a loud, visible diversion at the front of the hospital, drawing the attention of the press and the police, another team moved Captain Jackson, now on a reinforced tactical gurney, through the hospital's morgue. They loaded him into the back of a nondescript panel van that had been modified into a mobile medical bay. Alara, her side patched and bandaged, climbed in with him, refusing to leave his side. Admiral Thorne, Rex, and a small fire team of 4 soldiers piled into the van and a chase SUV. They pulled out of the loading dock and melted into the city traffic, just another anonymous vehicle on the rain-swept streets. The cabin was exactly as she remembered it, only more weathered, more reclaimed by the wilderness. It stood in a small clearing, a 2-story structure of dark, heavy logs, nestled against the side of a mountain. The air was crisp and smelled of pine and damp earth. It was a ghost from a life before her military one, a place of quiet family memories that now had to become a fortress. They carried Captain Jackson inside, placing him in the main room by the large stone fireplace. Alara immediately went to work, her hands moving with a familiar rhythm as she checked his vitals, adjusted his IV, and monitored the lingering effects of the neurotoxin. The antidote had done its job, but his system was still fragile. "He's fighting it," she said to Thorne, who stood watching, his face etched with worry. "His constitution is incredible. Anyone else would be dead." While Alara tended to her patient, Rex and his team turned the rustic cabin into a fortified position. They set up a perimeter, placed motion sensors in the woods, and established overlapping fields of fire from the cabin's windows. They worked with quiet, deadly professionalism. Alara found herself falling into her old role, not just as a medic, but as a tactical advisor. "The back porch is a weak point," she said, pointing. "It offers a covered approach. We need to barricade that door, and the loft window gives us a perfect overwatch position for the main trail." Rex looked at her, a newfound respect in his eyes. "You've done this before." "Too many times," she replied, her voice flat. Night fell like a black curtain. The only light came from the roaring fire in the hearth and the green glow of their tactical equipment. The forest outside was unnaturally silent. "They're here," one of the soldiers whispered, his eyes fixed on a thermal scope. Movement. 10, maybe 12 individuals. Fanning out. Professional formation. The sons of Gideon. They had tracked them. "Positions," Rex ordered, his voice a low growl. Alara's heart pounded, a familiar drumbeat of controlled fear and adrenaline. She checked the action on the pistol Rex had given her. the cold, heavy weight of it a grim comfort in her hand. Her patient, Captain Jackson, was still unconscious, vulnerable. Her mission was simple: keep him alive, at all costs. The first shot was a muffled crack from the woods, and a splinter of wood exploded from the window frame next to Alara's head. The siege had begun. The firefight was brutal and immediate. The enemy was well armed and disciplined, laying down a withering field of suppressive fire that chewed at the log walls of the cabin. Rex's team answered with precise, controlled bursts, their training evident in every action. Alara was on the floor, shielding Captain Jackson's body with her own. Bullets thudded into the logs above her head, the air filled with the smell of cordite and splintered pine. This was the world she had tried to escape. The noise, the violence, the razor's edge between life and death. "Status!" Rex yelled over the din.
"Johnson's hit!"
One of the soldiers shouted from the loft. "Leg wound! He's bleeding bad!" Without a second thought, Alara was moving. She low-crawled across the floor, dragging a medical kit with her. "Cover me!" she yelled. Rex and another soldier laid down a volley of fire toward the tree line, forcing the attackers to duck. In that brief moment, Alara scrambled up the ladder to the loft. The soldier, Johnson, was pale, a dark pool of blood spreading from a nasty wound on his thigh. The femoral artery was nicked. He'd bleed out in minutes. "Stay with me, Johnson," Alara commanded, her voice cutting through his pained groans. Her hands were a blur. She ripped open his pants, packed the wound with combat gauze, and applied a tourniquet high on his leg, cranking it tight until the bleeding stopped. It was a brutal, painful, life-saving act she had performed more times than she could count. As she worked, she could hear Rex coordinating the defense. "They're flanking! West side! Garcia, suppress!" Suddenly, a new sound. The shattering of glass. The enemy had breached a window on the ground floor. "Contact downstairs!" she yelled, grabbing her pistol. She helped Johnson into a more defensible position. "Keep pressure on that. You'll be okay." She scrambled back down the ladder just as two enemy fighters rolled through the broken window. Rex took one down instantly, but the other raised his rifle, aiming at Admiral Thorne, who was trying to get to cover. Alara didn't hesitate. She brought her pistol up. Squeeze, don't pull. The training was ingrained. She fired twice. Two sharp cracks that were distinct from the automatic rifle fire. The attacker jerked, a look of surprise on his face, before collapsing to the floor. Rex gave her a quick, appreciative nod. The battle raged on. They were outnumbered, and the cabin was slowly being torn apart around them. In the midst of the chaos, a groan came from the gurney. Captain Jackson was stirring. His eyes fluttered open, unfocused and clouded with pain. "Alara?" he rasped, his voice barely a whisper. He recognized her. She rushed to his side. "Cole, stay down. You're not safe." "The target," he mumbled, his brow furrowed in concentration. "They weren't just testing the toxin. They have a dispersal plan. The water." "The water?" she asked, leaning close to hear him. "The city. Water treatment facility," he managed to say, his voice strained. "Tonight. They're going to poison the whole city." The true stakes slammed into Alara with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't just about killing a single operator. It was about holding an entire city hostage. Just then, a massive explosion rocked the front of the cabin. The main door, which they had barricaded, was blown inward in a shower of splintered wood and smoke. The enemy was making their final push. Rex and his remaining two able-bodied men fell back into the main room, forming a tight semicircle around Jackson and the Admiral. "This is it," Rex yelled. "Make 'em pay for every inch!" Through the smoke and dust, the leader of the enemy team emerged. He was larger than the others, moving with an arrogant swagger. He leveled his rifle. "Give us the soldier," he snarled, "and we might let the old man live." They were out of time. They were out of options. The enemy poured in through the breach. This was the final stand. Alara stood over Jackson's gurney, her pistol held steady in a two-handed grip. The timid records clerk was a distant memory, a ghost of a life that no longer existed. Here, in the fire and the smoke, she was who she was always meant to be. She was Angel, and she would not let her patient die. The leader raised his rifle to fire, but before he could, a new sound cut through the air. The unmistakable thunderous chop of multiple helicopters, descending fast, and with it, the terrifying, high-pitched whine of miniguns opening fire. Outside, the forest erupted in a storm of tracers. The cavalry had arrived. Reinforcements, scrambled by Thorne on a backup sat phone, had found them. The enemy leader's arrogant expression turned to one of pure terror. He and his men were caught, trapped between the cabin's defenders and the overwhelming firepower from above. The battle turned into a slaughter. Within minutes, it was over. The woods fell silent again, save for the crackling of the fire and the sound of friendly soldiers securing the area. Admiral Thorne grabbed his radio. "We have the target, the city water treatment facility. Scramble every available asset, now!" They raced back toward the city, a convoy of military vehicles on empty pre-dawn highways. They had won the battle, but the war for the city was about to reach its climax. The press conference was already a circus. After the attack on the hospital, the story had leaked, and Dr. Alistair Finch, ever the opportunist, had seized control of the narrative. He stood at a podium in the hospital lobby, flanked by the hospital's board members, his face a mask of feigned solemnity and outrage. "Our community was violated last night," Finch said, his voice resonating with false emotion, "by a deranged and unstable former employee." He was painting Alara as a disturbed individual who had concocted a wild conspiracy, kidnapping a patient and causing the ensuing chaos. He was turning her into the villain and himself into the hero who had tried to stop her. "This woman, Alara Vance," he continued, "has a history of instability. She was fired for her erratic behavior, and in an act of petty revenge, she endangered lives. The authorities are still searching for her and the patient she abducted." The reporters scribbled furiously, eating up every word. It was a perfect story. The arrogant but brilliant doctor, a pillar of the community, versus a troubled, low-level worker. Just as Finch was about to take a question, the main doors of the hospital lobby burst open. Silence fell. Admiral Marcus Thorne strode in, his uniform immaculate, his face like thunder. He was flanked by Master Sergeant Rex and a squad of heavily armed Special Forces soldiers who fanned out, securing the room. Behind them, medics wheeled in a gurney. On it sat Captain Cole Jackson. He was pale and clearly injured, but he was conscious, alert, and wearing a military jacket. And walking beside him, her head held high, was Alara Vance. She was no longer in her tattered cardigan. She was wearing tactical pants and a simple black shirt. The graze on her side was bandaged, but she stood tall, her eyes finding Finch in the crowd. The scar on her temple was visible, no longer a mark of shame, but a badge of honor. Finch's face went white. He looked at Alara, at Jackson, at the Admiral, and his carefully constructed world began to crumble. Thorne walked directly to the podium, taking the microphone from Finch's limp hand. "You will have to forgive the interruption," Thorne said, his voice cold and clear, broadcasting to every news camera in the room. "But I believe Dr. Finch has left a few things out of his little story." He turned to Finch. "You call Flight Nurse Vance unstable. A liar." He then nodded to Rex, who held up a small audio player and connected it to the podium's sound system. The tinny, recorded voice of Dr. Finch filled the lobby. "The price is $5 million. He dies on the table. No one will suspect a thing." It was the recording from the parking garage, the deal he had made to murder Captain Jackson. A collective gasp went through the room. Finch swayed, his face a mask of pure terror. That's a fake. It's doctored. She set me up," he stammered, pointing a shaking finger at Alara. "Did she also set up this?" Thorne continued, holding up a tablet showing the wire transfer from an offshore account into Finch's name. $5 million. The exact price you quoted. Thorne addressed the reporters again. Dr. Finch was not a hero. He was a paid assassin for the same terror cell that attempted to poison this city's water supply last night. An attack that was thwarted thanks to the intelligence provided by Captain Jackson and the life-saving actions of Flight Nurse Alara Vance. Finch was finished. His reputation, his career, his freedom, all of it evaporated in that single, damning moment. The hospital board members backed away from him as if he were radioactive. Two uniformed police officers, who had entered with the military contingent, moved toward the podium. Finch looked around wildly, his eyes begging for an escape that didn't exist. "No! It's a lie! A conspiracy!" he shrieked as the officers reached him. His arrogance shattered, replaced by the pathetic, primal fear of a cornered animal. They put his hands behind his back, and the sharp click of handcuffs echoed through the silent lobby. "She's the criminal!" he screamed, his voice cracking as they began to drag him away. "I am Dr. Alistair Finch. I am the chief of surgery." He continued to scream and protest his innocence as he was hauled out of the lobby. A disgraced, weeping ruin of a man, his reign of terror over at last. The moment he was gone, the room exploded. Not with questions, but with applause. It started with one person, then another, until the entire lobby, filled with reporters, hospital staff, and patients, was giving a standing ovation. It was for her. For Alara. Anna, the young nurse, pushed through the crowd and threw her arms around Alara, sobbing with relief. "I knew it!" Anna cried. "I knew they were wrong about you. I'm so sorry I didn't speak up." "It's okay," Alara said, patting her back, a genuine smile finally reaching her face. "You're okay." Other colleagues, including Dr. Willis and Dr. Chin, who had stood by silently during her humiliation, now approached her, their faces filled with awe and shame, offering stammered apologies and congratulations. She simply nodded, accepting their words with a grace she hadn't known she possessed. Her name was cleared. Her honor was restored. She was vindicated. Later, in a quiet office overlooking the city, Admiral Thorne and Captain Jackson sat with Alara. Jackson, though still weak, looked at her with an expression of profound, unshakable gratitude. "The doctor said if you had been 30 seconds later with that antidote, I'd be dead," he said, his voice raspy but firm. "And at the cabin, you saved me again. You saved all of us. How do I even begin to thank you?" "You don't have to," Alara said softly. "It was my job." Admiral Thorne cleared his throat. "About that, Angel, your job as a records clerk is obviously over. And frankly, a medic of your caliber is wasted in a civilian hospital. No offense." He leaned forward, his expression serious. "The world is changing. The threats are changing. We're putting together a new kind of unit, a small, elite, rapid response medical team that will be embedded directly with Tier 1 Special Operations Forces. They'll go where the operators go, do what they do. We need someone to build it from the ground up, someone to lead it." He paused, his eyes locking with hers. "We need a commander with skills in both advanced field medicine and tactical operations. Someone who doesn't break under pressure. Someone who has proven they can make the hard calls. The job is yours, Alara, if you want it. We want Angel back. For good." It was everything she had run from. The danger, the chaos, the life on the edge. But it was also everything she was. It was a chance not to hide her skills, but to use them for a greater purpose. A chance to stop being a ghost and be a leader. She looked at Jackson, who was watching her with a hopeful smile. She looked at Thorne, the man who had always believed in her. She thought of the dusty archives, the whispered insults, the soul-crushing humiliation. She was done with that life. "I accept, sir," she said, her voice clear and strong. The final scene was not an ending, but a new beginning. Alara walked out of the front doors of Metropolitan General Hospital for the last time. She was not escorted by security. She was not fleeing in shame. She walked with purpose. She was no longer wearing the ill-fitting clothes of the forgotten clerk. She was dressed in a simple, practical flight suit, the uniform of her past and her future. Her hair was tied back in a tight, professional bun. The scar on her temple was no longer hidden. It was a part of her, a quiet reminder of the fires she had walked through. Captain Cole Jackson stood waiting for her by a black SUV. He was on his feet, leaning on a cane but standing tall. He smiled as she approached. "Ready to go, Commander?" he asked. "Ready, Captain," she replied, her own smile bright and genuine. Together, they walked away from the hospital, leaving the life of shadows behind. They were not walking toward a quiet life. They were walking toward a waiting helicopter, toward the storm. But this time, she was not running from it. She was flying into it, finally whole, finally free. We really hope you enjoyed this educational piece of content. and hope that you could understand the moral lessons behind it. The story of Alara Vance teaches us a powerful lesson about judging others. Just because someone is quiet or appears meek doesn't mean they are weak. True strength and courage are often hidden beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to be revealed. It also shows us that doing the right thing, even when it's hard and comes at a great personal cost, is always the right choice. Ilara lost her job to save a life, but in the end, her integrity and bravery were rewarded far more than she could have imagined. This reminds us that character is more valuable than status. Arrogance and cruelty, like Dr. Finch displayed, ultimately lead to downfall, while humility and courage lead to vindication. True strength is not about the power you hold over others, but about the integrity you hold within yourself. What would you have done if you were in Alara's shoes? Would you have risked your job and future to save a stranger against a powerful doctor's orders? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, make sure to smash that like button, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Have a nice rest of your day.